your forever home, or whether it's your investment property and stuff too, you gotta kind of feel those kind of areas. Like you get a feeling about where you want to be, right? And where you know. So yeah, I don't think it should matter when it comes to an investment property or your end product of where you live. It has to make sense.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are back in the lab with David Chinelli. Today, we're discussing purchasing that first property.
It's almost like you weren't sure there for a second.
I was going to say selling or purchasing, but we can start with purchasing and selling, because a lot of people these days, especially in the GTA, purchasing that first house is, it's a big milestone for them. And some people, it's a challenge. So with your knowledge, we're going to break down like what people need to know about buying that first house. And then later on, we're going to be talking about selling that property, what you should know, people you should be talking to, the logistics behind it. Like,
you mean people talking to, like, your cousins, uncles,
whatever,
who sold like 30 years ago, and like that's the advice you're looking for.
Whoever's in the game, you can give us all that knowledge that we need to know, and we'll break it down. So, let's paint a scenario, right? You have a young person who's in their late 20s, going in their 30s. They're looking to buy a house. They have a family coming on the way.
In this day and age, that's young.
That's young. I mean,
yeah,
especially in the GTA, you have people like me, like us in the room here, Alex, Isaac,
Not old guys like me, right?
I mean, you're still a young buck. Young buck, DC. So what is the first step in buying that house, right? Like, if we can start from the genesis of it all, what should people know?
A lot. Yeah. So this is one of the issues that I had when I was buying a house. There was I didn't have any guidance, so I felt that one of the reasons why I didn't enjoy the experience of purchasing a home is because the lack of knowledge I had about purchasing a home. And the more knowledge you have to start off, it helps. So certain things like what I always do with my buyers, if you're looking to purchase a home, your realtor should sit down and talk with you and talk about what's involved. What are your expenses? What are conditions? What do we do to protect you? How much money do I need in my bank account? Like how does this all, what is the process? It's something no one ever did for me. And that's, again, even for my wife and I, our first experience was terrible because we didn't know this. So the first thing you should probably do is, if you haven't contacted a realtor, is, interview them, interview realtors. And what you're looking for is talking to somebody who has a knowledge base for the type of property you're looking for. Somebody who's and somebody you jive with, like somebody can have a realtor can have all the knowledge in the world, but, or, let's be honest, if a lawyer or a professional, but if you don't jive with that person, don't have the same morals, don't have the same, connection, the relationship's not going to work.
And you bring up jive, right? What is it about jiving with a realtor, especially if it's like a transactional process? What does like the vibe do for the transaction overall?
It makes it enjoyable. Honestly, you want somebody who's going to listen to your needs and act upon those things, and not just trying to make the next sale. So when I say you just need to jive with somebody, jiving with somebody, especially with somebody who's a professional, is having them relate and, explain things that you need to, like, answer your questions, answers your text messages, or and listens to what you're needing, and then gives you feedback on those kinds of things, right? That's kind of what the jive is, right? Even something as simple as, you want to be communicated through text messages as opposed to phone calls. And if this person's constantly calling you and you're getting annoyed, you're not going to jive. So that matters. So yeah, you want to have, that's part of the process, figuring that's, and another, you want to have somebody that you do jive with, that has the knowledge, and you can, grow with and basically be honest with.
Yeah.
That's a big part, because you're not going to be happy unless you're both honest. The second part of that is knowing how much money you can afford.
Yeah.
Right. Like that's, sorry, not much money. Sorry. How much money, how much of a house you can afford. That's probably the better, because you know what you understand what I mean. Yeah. So what I do is with my buyers, if I get somebody reaches out to me, whether it's a warm call or whether it's, cold call, or somebody just kind of pulls me from the internet, I make sure that I have a buyer consultation with them first. What's I do? I bring them into here, my office. bring them into my brokerage, meet at a coffee shop. Yeah. I bring them materials and they go, which buyer documentation, like whole thing. And I also set them up with videos as well and like giving all this up in a PDF. But we go through the whole process. And this is the first step of like you have either that or talking with a mortgage broker, the two kind of one go hand in hand. Mm-hmm. If you haven't talked with a mortgage broker or mortgage specialist, that's the next step I tell them to do. We aren't going to go shopping. We're not going to go do anything till you know what you can afford. Mm-hmm. And the reason for that is like, people think it's like, well, because, you want to maximize how much money you can pay for. I'm like, no, that's not it at all. Mm-hmm. You don't want to put yourself looking at properties and wasting time for things that either you're underqualified or overqualified for. Like there's been some times where I've talked to clients and they thought they can only afford like say $600,000. And they're like, so they're looking online at $600,000 homes. Mm-hmm. Turns out they talked to the mortgage broker and they can afford $200,000 more than that. So what they were looking for, they weren't really, really happy with. All of a sudden, this extra $200,000 was, they didn't have to spend that extra $200,000, but they started to get closer to what they were actually wanted. That was closer to their dream home. And it allowed them to open up and like, oh, and okay, so I can purchase this, and it gives them the peace of mind as well that they can go looking at properties knowing they could afford it. So you get to enjoy the process.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does make sense.
But the other thing, a good thing is when you get a property that both the buyer and seller agree on, so you have an agreement of purchase and sale, and you've agreed to this, the reason why you want to be qualified before you start looking at properties is like, now within the first 48 hours, you don't have to worry about the financing. That's going to be waived if you have the financing condition. So you can afford that. It kind of takes away the ease of it. You don't have to start scrambling for paperwork. Oh, my T4s. All of a sudden I have to give, bank slips and all this. Your broker or your specialist already has that information. So it also streamlines the process.
Yeah.
Makes it much quicker and much more enjoyable.
Mm-hmm. You brought up an interesting point with working with the realtor. When you are assessing and you're evaluating the agent you're working with, what are some fundamental aspects that they need to have for you to advise the person who's looking to buy a house to be on the lookout for these specific things?
Yeah. So when you're hiring a realtor, you want to have a realtor that, knows the area. If it doesn't know the area, can find out where to get that information. It's knowledgeable. You don't have to, as a realtor, you don't have to pick somebody specific in every location. Like, oh, I'm buying in Etobicoke. I can only find an Etobicoke realtor. No, that's not how it works. Like, I've sold all over the place, and it's like I can find the information. It's like, with the school zones. Like, so having the resources, knowing where that is. But then it actually comes to the physical home, right? Like knowing what houses sold in the area, but what is physically wrong with the home, which is going to cost me a lot of money to replace. Yeah. Like the one good thing about myself about renovating and flipping homes and working with other contractors or doing a lot of renovations myself and selling a lot of houses, I don't always need a home inspector, but because I can see some of the problems they're having. But I do have my home inspector on dial. And there's many times I'm looking at a property and I'm like, and he's like, so I call Tony and I say, hey, Tony. And I'm like, well, am I right with this? And he'll confirm it a lot of times. Or I'm like, if something I just haven't seen before, I can have that like literally within seconds knowing what this issue is that we found. So knowing the homes, how it works. Another good thing is like figuring what you need to have as a realtor is an active realtor. An active realtor matters in this market. What do I mean by an active realtor? I'm talking about a realtor who's in it every single day, putting in offers. What's the trends? Are the houses getting listed low and then selling $400,000 or $500,000 over asking? Are we allowed to put conditions into this offer now? Like, what are the regular closings? Or can you put in this a clause with the sale of your home? Like those kinds of things can make or break a deal. It's not always the amount of money. There's other aspects of the deal that matters to sellers. Like closing's a big one, right? If you have a vacant home and you're selling a vacant home, you're going to want to close that house as soon as you possibly can because you're basically bleeding money. So like a 90-day, 120-day is not going to fly. All it takes is the realtor to, have some balls a little bit and call the other realtor and say, it doesn't really take much. It's like, what are you guys looking for a closing?
Yeah.
Hey, my guys are looking for this. So you start the negotiation without even really negotiating. But having that realtor to do that, have that foresight to do that goes a long, long way.
Yeah. And how do you fire a realtor? Let's say you start working with one. How does a client politely decline working with a realtor? Because they could be doing a lot of work, but then you're not feeling the vibe. You're not feeling they're active. Yeah. Is there a process? Because if they start the paperwork to get rid of them, it can be cumbersome. So how do they get rid of that realtor?
So I had a situation we had with a recent client. Same thing. They were trying to fire the realtor. They had signed a buyer representation agreement, and the agreement was for longer. He made him sign without even meeting with them first, which should be a red flag anyway. But they're first time home buyers. So you have to ask for a request for them for a release of the form if you have paperwork already signed.
Yeah.
If they say no, you can go to the broker of record. Basically, they were the ones that run the brokerage and plead your case and say, listen, the next step is go to RICO, which is our governing body, and say, yeah, we just didn't drive. He didn't fulfill, or she didn't fulfill our bargain. We didn't feel like we're getting this customer service. So sometimes you don't have written, honestly, a lot of times with my buyer representation agreement, we sign after working a couple weeks. Sometimes we'll buy our property, then we'll sign it. It happens sometimes too. There's different ways of doing it. It's not as, if the paperwork is already signed, it's not as easy as saying, sometimes realtors just won't give a release. Especially I've seen that happen with one of my clients. They listed a home and I can't say her name, but she's awesome. Still one of my clients.
Do business with her, yeah.
She took the key out of the lockbox. They were fighting with the other realtor. He would not release them from the property, and there wasn't really much they could do. They had to sit and wait it out till the agreement was done.
And how long is the agreement typically?
It can be any, but typically, in order to be on MLS, you have to be at least 60 days.
60 days, eh?
Yeah.
So if I don't like the realtor, I can wait 60 days and then not have any communication with them. As soon as 60 days is up, I can go work on the other one. But there is a holdover clause in there too. So if you're signing an agreement on MLS and you're not happy with your realtor, there is something called a holdover clause. Now, the holdover clause is if your realtor introduced the property to a buyer and say they work, and then all of a sudden your contract is done, and that buyer comes back within a certain holdover period, a lot of the times it's 90 days, and they buy the property, well, that realtor is still entitled to his commission or her commission. The caveat to that is that if you sign a new agreement, that holdover days is null and void, because now you've signed a new contract. The new realtor is now introducing the property, even though it was a potential buyer from the previous realtor. Does that make sense? It does make sense. And when we talk about paperwork, let's go back from the buyer side of things. Of course, you have your income. There's a lot of things. You also have credit score.
Yeah.
Give us an insight into how this really impacts you and your evaluation with a mortgage broker, as a real estate agent. What should people strive to have on a credit score, and what are other things that we might not even know, but it's common to have?
So again, I'm not a mortgage broker or broker specialist. So my knowledge is basically what a mortgage broker has told me. So basically, there's three aspects for qualifying for a good mortgage. Okay. Credit score is one of them. Job, a good job, and having to be in there past what do they call it? The probationary. Sorry, thank you for that. Yeah. Or if you are an entrepreneur, over 2 years of owning your business. And then the third one is a good down payment. Okay, so there's a difference between deposit and down payment, which also you have to have the money for. Those are things you have to keep in mind. Back to your previous question, we didn't even get into all the nitty gritty things you need, but that's something you do need. You do some sort of cash. You need some skin in the game, right?
Yes.
So if you have two of those three things, you can qualify for a good mortgage, basically. And they're all saying, well, sometimes it's 5 times your income between you and your spouse, and there's other factors. For example, if you're putting, if you don't want to put 20% down, which is a regular mortgage, and then you have to qualify for what we call as a high risk mortgage. If you're putting less than 20% down, you have to qualify. So there was a company called, it used to be Genworth and then CMHC. I forget what Genworth's new name is, but you have to get qualified for that. So you are allowed to put less than 20% down, but it has to be under $1 million and it has to be your principal residence. So you can't buy a rental property, for example, and put less than 20% down. Now, if you're putting 50% down, you can qualify for more of a higher mortgage.
Yeah.
Right. So depending on that, so that's, again, it's those factors. So it's not just simple saying you need a 700 score. Say your credit score is only 500, but there's a reason for that. You have a 500 because you're an entrepreneur and all of your credit was for your business, and your business is under 2 years old. So you needed your credit suffered a little bit. Yeah. You need a mortgage specialist who's going to massage that and talk to the bank or the lender and explain that.
Yeah.
That's where they come in handy. That's why you need somebody to say. That's why I also tell people, don't just go into a bank and walk into a bank, because a lot of times they're juniors. They don't know how to massage things. You need somebody who's a mortgage specialist or somebody who has other lenders or like, which is a broker that works with a whole bunch of people and they know how to massage. They know how to tell your story. It's like a good accountant. They know how to massage.
They know how to work around the numbers. They need to like finagle everything just to make it look good, but it's still accurate at the end of the day.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We're not talking about fraud.
Exactly.
We're massaging the work. It's telling a story. When you're qualifying for a mortgage, it's like anything else. You're telling a story of why you should qualify for a certain amount of money.
Yes.
Again, and that's with all the same numbers. Not all mortgage brokers, like all realtors, are not created equal. Okay? It's not black and white.
Yeah.
And that's also lenders, because lenders have different criteria that they're looking for. So having somebody who has, that's why I said to people before, just walk into a bank, you can talk to your local bank, but talk to a mortgage broker that has 40, 50, 60, 100 lenders, because there might be somebody specific for you. Like I have a mortgage broker that he specializes in for truck drivers, because he has a lender that knows how the trucking industry works, and he gets mortgages just for them, and they get a better rate and a better amount of money just because of their industry, that they have a lender who specializes in that type of mortgage.
For mortgage, that's like a good niche to be in. It's just like, like when I'm thinking about that, like if you're a real estate agent, you can be like, I only work with entrepreneurs looking to buy their first home. But like as a mortgage agent, I never thought about that. Like that's such a great market just to like, because every trucker is going to refer. If I'm in a trucking business, I know, okay, you're looking to buy a house, talk to my guy over here.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? That's great. So now we've covered that. Let's talk about timing. Timing is everything when you're buying a house. When is the best time to buy a house?
Yesterday.
Break that.
The best time to buy a house, they always say, is yesterday. And especially if you're looking at like in the GTA, for example. The GTA, like we historically, even with this little dip we're having right now, historically over the last 30 years, we have like between a 6.8 to a 7% return compounded annually. And that's, real estate's always been a long-term investment. All right. And if you're buying a house, like, I tell you, like, we're not looking to flip it in the next year. That's where that's like day trading. You don't do that. So timing is always matter. So the next best time to buy a house is today. Yesterday was the best time to buy it. Today's the next best time. The worst time to buy a house is tomorrow. Try to time the market, because you'll never time it perfectly. What I say to my clients is, if you find the home that you love, get the mortgage now. We'll work within the mortgage, maybe get a shorter mortgage. Hopefully the rates will drop, and then you can refinance it, pull equity from it too. We can make it work. Right. So it's better to get the home of your dreams, and then we work on the finances later. And then, because over time, you're not even going to notice like what you paid for the home. I remember we bought a house. My wife and I bought a house in December 3rd, 2011. We paid $865,000, which is a lot of money back in those days. But we almost lost the house because the sellers wanted $870,000. And we wouldn't pay anything more than $865,000. There was no rhyme or reason behind it. So I just had the
$870,000, $865,000.
$5,000. We almost lost the house for $5,000. You know how much, if you mortgage that $5,000, how much it would cost on a monthly basis?
How much?
It's like $20 a month. It was less than a cup of coffee a week.
So why were you both so stubborn with the price?
Well, I don't want to say it. But my realtor didn't break it down and said, "Are you guys stupid? Like you're going to lose this home, which you need," because we had our second baby coming in, and for $5,000. We almost lost the house.
Yeah, so did you end up?
We got it for $865,000.
Is that the house you currently live in right now?
No, that's when we just sold. We just moved. Yeah, we just moved early.
Okay, gotcha.
But the funny thing is that $865,000, we ended up selling that house almost 10 years to the date for $2.5 million.
That's a good amount of change right there.
Sure, we put a little bit of investment.
$5K could have lost you a deal, and you'd have been kicking your ass right now if you guys didn't didn't sell the house.
So I make sure. So this is some of the mistakes that I would see from my realtors in the past, that I make sure my clients realize that they don't make the same mistakes that I made. I don't want my clients to make the same mistakes that I made. I made a lot of mistakes, and I didn't have a lot of guidance. Yeah. So I make sure that my clients have as much guidance and that I never had. I also try to explain things and put them in layman's terms. Do you realize that $2,000 works out to being a cup of coffee? Can you not have a cup of coffee on Thursday and just make it for yourself on Thursday? Yeah, I can do that. Then you can afford this house. It's something simple like that.
Yeah. And also that's like, I think from talking to you, that's one of your biggest advantages. You've been through hell and back. You've got burned. You've had a lot of successes, but a lot of the things that you've gone through have given you the knowledge and the armor to understand this is a bad deal. You need to do this. It looks bad, but in the future, it might actually pay dividends. And you brought up something that's very interesting when you're talking about, it's the best time to buy is yesterday. But if we can forecast in the future, they're saying a recession's coming in 2023. Don't buy a house. Don't have cash.
If you listen to those other gurus, they said exactly the same thing I had. They're like, what are you worried about?
Yeah.
If you're holding on to a long-term asset, what are you worried about? If you're going to be buying the house, now it's so the prices are dropped. No one can ever predict what the market's going to happen, what's going to happen in the future. Nobody knows. When my clients say, what's my house worth? What was my house worth in 6 months? I'm like, I don't know. Do I look like God? Listen, there's a lot of things I am, and I am not psychic. Exactly. Yeah. All I can tell you is what the market is happening now. So if you are looking to sell your home, you have to know in today's market what it's worth. We can never predict. I used to be an analyst, and I remember having this conversation many times. And one of the things when I was an analyst, I remember going to TD.
Yeah. So
TD used to, every bank used to do an economic quarterly meeting. They would pay for us analysts to come. They'd feed us lunch, sometimes a couple of drinks, and they'd have their top analysts talk. And I remember in 2008, and we had this their top analyst at TD. We're in TD Tower. And we're talking, somebody put up their hand and said, well, you're talking about the real estate or the housing market. What about condos? And he's like, oh, I still remember to this day, this condo market, it's in a bubble. It's going to crash. It's going to crash soon. We have way too many towers, way too many buildings being built, way too many cranes in the sky. We had 82 months following that of progressive value increase since that time. Condos went up in value every single month for the next 82 months. He was completely wrong, completely wrong. And that was their top analyst at the time, economic analyst. They didn't have a clue. So my point to that is no one ever knows. No one knows. No one predicted what happened in February of this year, of 2022, that we'd have $1.33 million on average. That's insane for February. Yeah. We're talking February. Talking practice?
And that's even what happened with Corona too, right? When everyone was leasing their condos way below market price and be you know what? This isn't the right time to do this. This isn't the right time to buy a house. But now look back, the market has corrected itself. The true value of whatever you paid for the house, it's always going to get better and better and better. So I think to that point, because I was looking at the condo prices at the time, I was like, you know what, this is super cheap. But 2 years later, it's back to
it's insane.
It's insane now.
I had so many of my buyers. I said there was so many, say 3 or 4 of them that were looking to buy rental properties. I'm like, dude, this is December. The coronavirus is it's on its way down. The prices are as low as it's going to get. It's December 2020. Buy now. Buy this condo now. You'll be kicking yourself if you don't buy it. None of them bought. They said, what's going to happen? Are people going to come back? Or are people going to rent? Within 5 months, it was just unaffordable for what they qualified. It went up that fast.
They always say, man, scared money never made money.
I like that one. I never heard that one before.
Yeah, scared money never made money. If you sit on your hands with the money, what are you going to do with it? It's just going to stand still.
Idle hands, man.
Idle hands, man.
Not my thing.
So and now we're entering a new part of buying that house. Investment properties, right? Yeah. You've been in the game for some time. You own a house where you live with your family, and you also own some properties where these are investment. These are your assets. So if I'm looking to buy an asset in 2023, it could be a condo, it could be a house. What are the fundamental things that you go through a checklist to tell yourself this is a great area to buy this house? This condo is a great condo to buy. Let's tap into that.
There's a lot of questions. Where do you want me to start with that?
I mean, I was teeing you off.
So yeah. Okay. So areas are one thing. So first off, if you're buying an investment property, that's called investment as opposed to assets, because assets can be, it's labeled as many different things.
It could be a stock or whatever.
Yeah. Because what somebody calls an asset, another person calls a liability. Rich dad, poor dad, right? What makes you money? What doesn't make you money? So if you're looking at it as a second property as an asset, let's call it that way. It depends. And the reason why I say it depends is how much time and effort do you want to put into the property?
Yeah.
So if you're looking to have a hands-free investment property, condos are a better option for you. And here's why, is that you don't basically own the big ticket items that goes with the condo. Your condo corporation owns those things. We're talking about your roof. We're talking about your HVAC, your windows, your doors. Those doors can be expensive, believe it or not. The windows can be very expensive. Doors. Those doors you get into, they can be a couple $1,000s easily. Those aren't cheap. Those doors you walk into your condo. Those aren't cheap, right? You don't own those doors.
I always felt them like they're very thick, they're heavy, they feel premium, but I didn't know they have like a major cost to them.
Oh yeah, they're like thousands and thousands of dollars each door.
Jeez.
Well, think about it. They have to keep guys like you out of them, right?
Yeah.
But the reason why I like that, even like there's issues like, so what you're looking for in an investment property is more hands off. The reason why condo might work for you is that you have all that can go wrong that was actually your reliability they're going to call you in the middle of the night for is like maybe some plumbing stuff that happens, your bathroom, but pretty much the structure is there. So yeah, but again, condos don't go up in value as much as say like a detached house.
Yeah.
Right. That's the other thing. And you're looking at a single unit. So if that single unit doesn't rent out, you're also negative that whole unit for that month period of time. So it's a little bit riskier in that kind of sense. But in this day and age, we're looking at the markets. Condos, if they're newer, they rent pretty quick and you get a good price, get tenants. It's great. If you're looking for, like if you want a little more hands-on, that's why I find that houses like triplex at least is a great investment property for you. The reason why I say a triplex is one of the reasons we just talked earlier about condos. When you have more than one door, more than one unit, for an investment property, you're able to have maybe two of the units carry the property while you maybe renovate one or try to fix them. If you're not getting income from one, you're getting income from other two. You're not going to, if one doesn't pay, it's not going to be completely out. You have to pay all of your mortgage by yourself, right? The second thing is that the values go up faster with either like a detached house or semi-detached over a condo in areas like Toronto, for example, because just the nature of the value of the property is bigger. That's usually the way it works, right? Yeah. So, but you're also able to, if you have your hands on, like you can buy a shitty property. That's what I kind of look for. But you're looking for a fundamental property that, so the fundamentals are sound. So things are the fundamentals. We're talking about your foundation, your roof, your windows, your HVAC. If those aren't sound, and those are also good. If you're like, if you want to do a little hands-on, have like a guy that can do all that stuff, you hammer them for price because you're going to have to fix those things.
You said HVAC. What is HVAC?
Oh, sorry. HVAC stands for heating, ventilation, and air conditioning.
Got
your furnace and air conditioning. HVAC.
Got you.
Yeah.
And going back to triplexes, because a lot of people get confused with this. How do you define what a triplex is?
So legally explaining, a triplex is 3 units above ground, and you can have the basement apartment. It's usually 3 units. Some people consider a triplex just 3 units. So try 3.
And all like the HVAC is separated for each unit?
Can be or cannot be. Like, so for example, my 6plex I have in Roncesville, it's a 6plex, but it's all under one HVAC, has one heating. We have rads and no air conditioning.
No air conditioning?
It's over 100 years old. We didn't have ventilation.
So each tenant is like, has their own heat. Like,
and I also pay for all the electricity, so they can plug in as much air conditioning they want to in the house, and I'm the one that fronts the bill. But your price also reflects that, right? The rental price also reflects that.
And when we talk about pricing, when you're buying the house, like for first-time home investors or buyers, are there programs that exist for them to help them make that first purchase?
Yeah. Obviously, talk to the mortgage broker about that. But I always like to tap into the bank of mom and dad. That also helps.
Yeah, I mean that's a privilege. Yeah. Do you come across people who like young guys who have like, let's say 28, but then their parents are loaded? They're like, yeah, we'll give you extra $300K.
Not usually. It happens once in a while.
Yeah,
I come across that too. But then like, I had a client where he had lost his wife, and instead of waiting for him to pass on some of the purchase, of the inheritance to the kids, he decided to help them out now and give them the down payment to both of them, which is very noble and nice. And he had more money than he could sit on, but he wasn't giving all of it, and it's just like you still need to live. So yeah, you do come across that.
Got you. And going back to areas, especially
we didn't even touch on the rental properties.
Yeah. Areas like, are there emerging areas you see in the GTA coming up in 2023 people should know about?
So I laugh at that question because it's like everyone thinks that there's another area coming up, but no one knows, right? Until like there's plans. Like for example, like along the lakeshore here in Toronto, we've been talking about gentrification there for a long time, and it just never really happened. Kind of got there, like so. Instead of trying to figure out what the next up and coming property is, what I like to say when you're looking for a rental property, the best thing is always, if especially rental properties, is if you're staying along the subway line, you know that they're or close to highways, amenities, you know those properties are going to have good value always, right? Because that's what renters looking for. If you know, so I would say instead of looking for the next up and coming, because you never know if it's ever going to come to fruition, find a property you know the area. If you have a rental property in which you want to be a little more hands-on, have it within 15, 20 minutes with you from where you live. In case something goes wrong, you can be there in time. You know what I mean? That's what you want. And also because you know the area. I had a friend of mine that, lived in Toronto and heard that Peterborough was the next up and coming neighborhood. So he bought a property in Peterborough and he sold within a year. He's like, I wasn't expecting that. It wasn't the type of experience, like the personnel wasn't, he didn't get the Peterborough area. Or I have a friend of mine who like works in Peterborough. He goes, what's he talking about? It's the best part of Peterborough. Like, so he just didn't understand, couldn't wrap his head around it. So something can be up and coming for one person, but it might be the shits for another person.
Yeah.
Right. So my suggestion to always, whether you're buying investment properties, buy in an area that you absolutely know. As opposed to trying to time that same thing like time in the market. No one ever knows, right?
And you'll see some people too, right? They buy houses in certain areas which completely changes their lifestyle. Like you were living in a condo, but then you moved to the burbs, but then you got to drive everywhere. Then your driving costs, your fuel costs add up. To get groceries, it's like another drive. To go to the gym, it's another drive. So
you get fat and lazy.
You know what I'm saying? Like you gotta get more money just to compensate for the fact that you can afford a house perhaps outside of the GTA. And those are some costs people don't even think about.
I'm laughing because when I worked at Toronto Hydro, there was barely anybody living in Toronto. So you had these guys, we call them, basically weekend warriors. They bought these big houses outside, had to take the GO train in every single day. Why? Like, I wanted a bigger house for my family, room for, like, you didn't even get to hang out. By the time you get home, it's dark, you put your kids to bed. Like, you got this big house, all you're doing is sleeping in it. And you're a weekend warrior because the weekend's the only time you can spend any time in this quote unquote big house.
Yeah.
Whereas if you live 10 minutes away or half an hour, like I lived in a house, like I was living in a smaller house. I was working downtown. I'm like, but I was seeing my wife, having dinner with my wife and my kids every single day. And I was like, to me, that mattered more than a big house, which I never got to experience. So everything and I was taking the subway everywhere. So insurance was cheaper. Everything got cheaper. So, but again, I'm not knocking those people for like, to me, it just didn't make sense to me at that point. It just didn't make sense.
Yeah. Also, like if you look at the GO train too, how much time do you spend on the GO train to go from, like a Guelph to Toronto, just back and forth. Burlington, right? So these are some things that there's one story too, Dave, like one gentleman, he was working with the TTC. Every single day, he commutes back and forth from London, Ontario, just to go to work, just because he couldn't afford anything within the city or like the surrounding area. So he has to drive all the way back from London. So it's like tough for people. It's like
when you see your kids, like your wife, maybe you don't like your wife or your kids, and that's why you live so far away. I don't know.
People are living to work, man. Like instead of like turning around and like working to live, it's not becoming like the lifestyle of just being able to afford a home. It's brutal. Yeah.
So I know I like maybe I was different that way. I looked at our family and our needs first before like material needs, I guess, in that kind of sense. And I wanted to see how it affects your life. And that's how you should make a decision, right? It's like, there's like, for example, there's houses in like, there was in Leaside and people like buying like back in the day, like $2 million for a semi-detached that had one bathroom, but it's 5 minutes from their home. They bike ride and their kids played hockey there. And it's like, everything was close. All their friends in the community, and they enriched their lives. So the house wasn't big, but it was expensive because it was a great area because everything was so close. And they just love the area, and that's like that makes sense to me, right? And that's kind of so. When we're looking, whether it's your forever home or whether it's your investment property, it's up to you. Gotta kind of feel those kind of areas. Like you get a feeling about where you want to be, right, and where you know. So yeah, I don't think it should matter when it comes to an investment property or your end product where you live. It just it has to make sense.
Yeah, and when you make that decision to buy that house, there's closing costs. A lot of individuals don't understand what entails closing costs. Can you break down what those are?
Yeah. So in our buyer consultation meeting, we talk about everyone's role from the mortgage broker to the lawyer conditions. And one of the biggest ones we say, which allows people to enjoy the buying experience, is knowing what your closing costs are. Mm-hmm. So some of the closing costs we start to break down fundamentally. Your biggest one you hit right off the bat is the difference between a deposit and a down payment. Mm-hmm. Like a deposit is usually in Toronto area, it's 5% of the purchase price. This amount needs to be liquid. The reason why it needs to be liquid is that if an agreement comes to place between both buyer and seller, the listing brokerage needs to have that amount of money and some sort of guaranteed funds into their trust account within 24 hours. Otherwise, that agreement means absolutely nothing. Okay?
Yeah.
So it stays in there for what two things happen. One, you waive all your conditions. It's a firm deal. Now that deposit comes part of your down payment. So if you already put 5% down and you're looking to put 20% down on closing, you have to come up with that additional 15%. Okay. The second thing is if you're not happy with any of the conditions, whether it's home inspection, status certificate, or financing, if you're not qualified, you get that deposit. As long as your agreement has those conditions in there, let me make that first and foremost, you have to have that conditions. You don't automatically get them. You have to put your realtor has to put those in there. If you're not happy, if you're not satisfied with any of those conditions, you get your deposit back without deduction, 100% back they say within 24 hours. Sometimes it takes up to a week. That's a big cost. So knowing how much the deposit and the down payment, how much you can afford, what's liquid. So if you have a TFSA, for example, sometimes it can take anywhere from a week to a month to get that money out. If you're putting an offer in, you need to figure that out before how much money you have in my bank again or my line of credit. It matters. This is something nobody ever told me. So when we bought our matrimonial home, I had to come up with $40,000 within 24 hours. I'm like, what do you mean? Thank God I had my line of credit, but it could have screwed over the deal. We could have lost the deal because my realtor didn't tell me I needed that liquid. A big one is land transfer tax is the next big cost. Lawyer fees aren't that bad. I would say around any from $1,200 to $2,000. So I say it's the real grand scheme of things. It's not cheap, but it's not like nothing. But land transfer tax is a big one. This one, land transfer tax, is a tax which the government charges you when you're changing hands between a buyer and a seller, right? So it's basically changing title. And it doesn't matter how many times the title changes, land transfer tax always have to be paid. The difference is like which land transfer tax get paid. If you're buying in the city of Toronto, there is a double land transfer tax. So you pay the Ontario provincial land transfer tax and you pay the Toronto land transfer tax. So you get double the amount.
So they're double ending too.
Yes. Exactly. Yeah. So you're paying double the amount. Yeah. The caveat to that is that property taxes, because the population in Toronto, which is what your taxes are based on, is larger. So it's spread over more people. So your property taxes year to year are less than the surrounding neighbors in the GTA. So they're going to get you one way or the other way for taxes.
You're not running away from that tax.
But the two things you have to understand is like, yes, land transfer tax is due on closing. You cannot add that to your mortgage, right? That's a big one too. And if it's in Toronto, it's a double land transfer tax. And it's based on, it's not like a set amount. It's not like say 3%. There's an equation that comes in. So, I always tell budget between 3 to 5%. Let's say in between that too as well. So for land transfer tax. So that's a big cost, right? So yeah. And again, that's a big one. I had a buddy of mine who's in the brokerage, been a realtor a little longer than I have. And his client almost sued him once because he didn't tell him about the land transfer tax in Toronto's double. And he's like, he was going to try to sue him for that amount. He goes, you didn't tell me in Toronto. I'm like, well, you have to close the deal. Anyway, so I make sure I learn. These are stuff you learn. Like this before as a realtor, I learned this. I'm like, oh shit, I had to make sure my clients know what land transfer. Yeah. A big one too is when you're selling a property is your sellers have to pay HST on their fees. And they don't. I make sure I put it in my big thing. You pay HST. Like it's part of that cost. So yeah, there's at least on the buy side, you don't have to pay for a realtor. The seller pays for us. So that's one thing you do get off. Yeah. The other break you get if you're a first-time home buyer, there is a land transfer tax rebate. So it's there. You get a land transfer tax rebate in Ontario for $4,000 for a first-time home buyer, and in Toronto, I believe it's $4,450. I think in total it's like $8,450 or $8,475, something like that.
Wow, that's a lot of because we just think of like, okay, we're closing the deal, we pay the money, but then all these other fees just eat you up. Yeah. And that could like rack up another like 40, 50, 60K, which you did not see again if you did not have the right real estate agent who you did not jive with, who did not have all these things.
Oh, you're just pulling it all in, everybody?
I bring it all back together. So when we go back into the home ownership now I bought it. Now the fundamentals of like actually selling that house.
Yeah.
Right. So how long does it typically take to sell a house in Toronto once it's listed?
Oh, shit, dude. It's been like, I've had offers in 24 hours. I've had offers that, like, I've had one that got listed for like 6 months. It didn't sound there was nothing wrong with it. You know what I mean? It's typically it's the last, the GTA, it's under a month, it's under a month usually. And it also depends too, like, strategies. Like when the market was hot, we were listing properties low and having bidding wars. We're letting the market dictate. So it was very common to see houses sell within 3 to 6 days. That was just typical because we listed so low. I did a case study in which, I had a property listed. I had 190 showings in a week. We got 28 offers. It was ridiculous. It sold in a week. Boom, crazy, right? Then there's that other property we talked off camera where I had listed. I was going to have a bidding war. We got it listed in the first day. Sold for $400,000 above asking, more than we thought we were going to get. And we got that in the first day. So we didn't even do the bidding war days. And then there's recently where another property I had where I listed below market value. We just didn't get any bites. We didn't know we did everything right. So yeah, sometimes it's tough to tell, but
and you can't really tell what dictates why people are not putting an offer, even though everything is checked out. You've done everything from your side as an agent. You've done the staging. You've done the advertising for the property, and some people are just not biting.
Yep.
Damn. And what about like people who are investors from like out of the country because they have access to the MLS? And they're like, and I heard too, Canada is one of the countries where a lot of international investors come and buy property. What are the regulations now? Because I heard something along the lines where they're limiting international investors to come in the country.
Yeah. Things change all the time. So I know it was like there was some like the amount of money was supposed to be down to up to 35% as opposed to 20%. There's other regulations. I don't really know because I don't deal with a lot of international clients. So because they've changed so often, I'm not really an expert on that, but there are things about it too. It's like, I think it was besides the 35% down, they also had to pay an additional tax upon it too. And there was other. Also, money laundering laws are big too. Like if that's a big one for international purchasers, we have to vet where the money's coming from.
You as an agent,
we have to vet everything, and especially when it comes to foreign buyers. If you can't vet it, then it gets flagged. The deal might not go through if we find there's something wrong with it. Right? We don't know if we can't track where the money's coming in from, the deal's not going to go through.
You think that's not part of your job? Right.
I didn't realize it's part of my job. I didn't sign up to be a police officer. I have to fill out this documentation saying like who my client is. Or it's funny because we have to ask for when you're purchasing things you don't know about. Like we have to figure out where your deposit's coming from. So you, as a buyer, you have to submit to us, to your realtors, where the money's coming from. What's the bank account? What's the name on the account? What type of account is on it? Like, where did you get this money from? How can I verify this money's coming from you? And it's funny because in the beginning, you had some pushback from my clients. Are like, why do you need to know this? And I'm like, it's a good question. But now you understand, right? Because it's like they're trying to like hinder any facilitation of nefarious activities happening. That's basically what they're doing. And we're just one more step that maybe somebody who's trying to launder money, that a hurdle that we would have to cross. So again, when I became a realtor, I had no idea we had to do this, vet people through this way.
Got you. And like when you're selling your home as a homeowner, let's say you have multiple offers.
Yep.
They all are very identical, similar buying persona. What takes that offer over the edge if you're looking to like, I really got to get this house? Do you got to talk to the buyer? Like, what are some ways you can actually get that house sold?
Am I representing the buyer or the seller?
Let's say you're representing the seller, and you have they have multiple offers, and they're all identical.
So the first thing I tell my clients to do is don't look at the touchy, warm letters that I always provide as the buyers on the buy side, because I don't want to get my clients emotionally involved because I want to get them the max amount of money. But sometimes it does. Letters do actually work because if you get to a point where offers are really close, closing dates. So there's a number of aspects of an offer that make it very similar. Okay, so there's obviously the price. There's deposit right? There is the closing date and there's conditions. So those all play a major role in what makes an offer similar, right? Then there's things like touchy-feely stuff, which are on top. So if those are all exactly the same, then yeah, like if all the buyers are exactly like within a couple $100 of each other, like, okay, well, then they start. Then I say, okay, now you can start looking at who the people are.
Maybe like if they send like a bottle of scotch, and I know you like the Glenfiddich. They're like, just hey, just get my offer through the door.
So another thing that does matter, yes, the rapport you have with the other agent is huge. So when you're getting to this is what I say. It's very important that you hire an agent that represents you well, because when you get to the negotiation table, the rapport that your agent has with the other agent can make or break a deal. It's huge. It's won me so many different offers that I should have not even we didn't even offer the most amount of money. When we used to present in person, we used to do this whole spiel and we talk about our clients and we would talk about them. And it matters because the other agent sometimes came back to me and said, my sellers like you. They like your guys. They like your story. We had other guys come in. They're just very cold. This is just take my offer. Like, no, you need to build rapport. And it's funny, you try as an agent, try to be impartial when it comes to offers sometimes, but the ones that have reached out to you, a little story, you can't help but fight for them for a little bit. It does matter. So that's why when I've done some of my speeches online and some of the stuff I'm saying, it matters who you hire. It matters who represents you. Especially when you go into the negotiation table, it does matter. Yeah. So it does help over the edge.
Kind of reminds me, have you seen the show on Netflix called The Watcher?
Yeah. Did you like that show, by the way?
I was feeling it a little bit. Like I what I loved about it.
Dragged on a little bit.
Yeah, I like the way Dean's persistence of actually buying a house for his family. Yeah. There's something about his essence of just, I want this home for myself and my kids.
He gave up everything for it.
He gave up everything. He went to the bank. He liquidated everything. He went behind his wife's back.
Yeah, don't do that.
Yeah. Have you seen people do that, by the way?
No.
People do some shady stuff.
So as an agent and somebody's representing you very well, my job is to make sure that you don't get into financial problem, that you're able to afford this after you purchase a home. It doesn't make me sleep at night that even though that it pads my bank account and you have nowhere to live because you couldn't afford your mortgage. No, and that's the thing is what I tell my clients too is that's what we talk to a mortgage broker. Talk to a mortgage broker, figure out what you can afford, but let's try to not hit that price point. Let's try to keep it behind there so you're able to afford something comfortably. Just because a bank can give you a maximum amount of money doesn't mean you should take it. The bank is not your friend.
They're there to make money.
Yeah. It's a business, for crying out loud.
Yeah.
Did you know that the TD, even since the World War, has continued to give dividends, even through through downtimes? This is what 1900, I think it was. Or they've never failed to give a dividend.
Even BMO too. When you're looking at their financials, they've never missed a dividend payment date. Yeah. That's why the bank stocks are always the best.
During the Depression, they were still paying dividends.
Still paying.
What does that tell you? Those guys are making money.
They're making money, man.
Cha-ching, buddy. They're not your friend.
They're not, man. I was telling Elisa earlier, the casino, because she was in the Chino, right? The casino's in the business for the casino to make money. They're not there to
Well, you trying to tell me Vegas wasn't built on winners?
Oh, no way. And we're talking about, now for homeowners, how do you start to develop a real estate portfolio? Because you have from we've chatted, you have some properties. How do you advise people going about, with the ambition to develop a portfolio for themselves?
Again, it all comes to risk. So if you're looking to build an investment portfolio, we sit you down and figure out what your risk is and how hands-on you want to be. That's basically what it comes down to. How much money do you want to take? How much money can you afford? If this goes into negative, or is it going to affect your life? Right? I would never advise anybody to purchase a property if in case they weren't able to pay for it, that all of a sudden affects their home life. If you understand that. So for example, if your investment property, for some reason, you're not able to rent it out and you have to sell your home to make that work, it's not the right investment for you. Right. So the first thing I would suggest doing is I always tell my clients is you could buy a condo first to get your feet wet. It's fine. Nothing wrong with that. You're not going to make a crazy amount of money off of it from the day to day. So for the month, sometimes you might be in the negative position. If you're okay with that, it helps you with taxes at the end of the year. If you're losing $500 a month, wherever, it's not great. It's not advised, but it's but the play of that may be equity. I get it. If you have a longer term goal, great. But if you have a little more money and you want to, I would tell them, get a triplex or more. So something that has multiple units. And that way, it's, again, the reason why is we talked before, you're able to renovate one while the other ones carry the properties. You're able to, basically capitalize on more of the product. And you're not just sitting on, you're able to capitalize on the market better because you have multiple units. More doors makes you more money. That's just the way it is. So, and the cap rate you have, technically most of the time you're more in a cash position, cash positive position if you have more doors. Does that make sense? You know, understand doors, I mean units.
More units, yeah. Because like some people too, like for example, like when my dad was buying his, he bought a house in London, 2 homes in London for Ontario,
okay,
for Fanshawe students and people who went to Western. And even though like, because I saw the houses, and I was trying to understand, like at the time I was in uni, are you looking to be cash flow positive like pretty soon, or are you just looking to hold on to something that might evolve into an asset, which, okay, it's increased by 80,000. Typically, like, what do you see people do? Are they looking just to sell at the right time, or are they looking to have a cash flow well,
not selling. You don't even need to sell it. Okay. So the equity play, which I've mentioned before, a rental property, what it means is that you purchase a property and over a certain period of time, the equity, so the value goes up. Without selling your property, you're able to tap into the equity. So how much it's gone up, loan to value 80% on a line of credit, on a home equity line of credit. So we call it a HELOC. So a home equity line of credit, what they'll do is they'll say, okay, this is what I'm saying. This is the equity play. Say you purchase a property for $500,000. You've rented out, even your negative cash position every year, so you're negative $1,000 a year. Well, that extra $1,000 you're in a negative position, you can actually use it as a tax write-off. So if you make $99,000, $100,000 a year, and obviously you're negative with the rental property, all of a sudden you're only making $99,000 a year. You're paying taxes at $99,000, not $100,000. Okay, so that's where that comes in handy. But if your property, which you purchased from $500,000, goes up to $1 million in say 5 years, you go to your bank and you say to your lender and say, "Hey, I want to tap in my equity." What they do, if they evaluate it, they say it's the most they can give you is loan to value is 80%, 80 to 20. So $1 million times 80 is $800,000, right? You purchase your property for $500,000 after 5 years. Say there's only $400,000 left on your mortgage. $800,000 minus $400,000 is $400,000. You're with me so far?
So far, yeah.
They can give you a home equity line of credit, which is a better rate because you're secured by your home. So it's secured by which means in case you go bankrupt, they can still get their money back from selling your assets. So you're using your house as collateral. So your rate would be prime plus something, which is better than an unsecured line of credit. So you take that $400,000 and you're able to purchase another property from it. You're using the bank's OPM, other people's money. You're using the bank's money.
Rich dad, poor dad.
There you go.
Exactly.
You're using the bank's money to purchase another property. And then you can do that over and over and over and over again. Now, what also helps you is interest. 100% of the interest that you're using from that home equity line to purchase investment property from an investment property is 100% tax deductible. So again, back to that play, you're making $100,000 a year, but it's costing you $10,000 in interest to borrow that money. Well, now you're not $100,000. You're only making yours $90,000, and you get taxed on $90,000. Not the $100,000.
Wow. That was a lot. That was a lot of gems you dropped right there.
There's a lot. That's why I love investment property. It's like you cannot get ahead working for somebody else. I would say that unless you have assets that will work for you. This is passive income. This is how your passive income works. The equity play on it, what your dad could have done too, as well, is like obviously just carries the property. You can carry a property till it gets cash positive. So it might take a number of years to it, but then you can use the equity and build it up and then again, make it nicer and prettier and get more money for it. And that's another play you could do on it. To maximize your potential, owning 2 properties is better than having one really nice one, right? So that's just what happens. So that's how the equity plays on that too.
Yeah. And he also, he ended up buying another house over time, which was actually like, I liked it better. And he also used it as part of his office because he was in accounting. He was like doing like taxes for people, bookkeeping for certain businesses. So he's able to save money on like getting an external office and make something kind of like beside the house, but still all the students can use the house however they please. So as we work towards wrapping up.
So do I have your dad's number? God, this guy's buying property. He's not using it. What's going on here, man?
He's a top guy like me. I really respect him for what he's done for the family. As we work towards wrapping up, like for you in investment property, because are you looking at getting more properties over time? Always.
Yeah. Like the building we're sitting right now is my next purchase. I know it's owned by our family. So I try to buy property every other year. So this is the next one where I held off on this year purchasing it from the family. Just, there's a lot of stuff that happens with family stuff. So, but yeah, because I have two, I've also bought pre-construction. So one just came to the market, got registered this year. So we're waiting for that to be rented out and start earning some cash. So I don't like to, my dad wanted me to start purchasing properties every year. And I'm like, well, so every other year to every 2-3 years, I try to add to my portfolio. We have 2 more pre-constructions coming up as well. So, I'm trying to kind of getting tapped out pre-construction just because of different number of reasons, but I'm always looking, like I want to add to the portfolio this way. This one made sense. It's in the commercial aspect. And it's something I already have my office here and I'm paying rent to my mom. So
yeah.
I want to pay rent to myself. So.
Exactly. All right, everybody. Thanks for tuning in to the DC Talks podcast. We hope you enjoy that. We'll be back next week with a brand new episode. All right. Have a great day, everybody.
Ciao.